Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, April the 1st, 2025. April is supposed to be the cruelest month, isn't it? Well, at least according to the poem, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. T.S. Eliot starts his poem with April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire. And certainly in the northern hemisphere, April is about growth, and we think it's about spring and youth, and maybe that's why it might be so cruel, because as we get older we remember the past, and so there might be a disconnect there. We see the new season turning up, the growth, life, and yet that's a reflection on us and our past, and we look back at the past and the memories and what could have been and what was and can never be again. So maybe that's why it's the cruelest month. And it's interesting with his poem that he talks about tarot card readers and astrologers, right at the beginning, and he says, if you see Mrs. Equitone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. And I think one does have to be careful these days because there's a lot going on, and we have a conjunction between Saturn and the North Node, certainly in Vedic astrology, because Saturn is now in sidereal Pisces, and the North Node is also in sidereal Pisces. And of course, the North Node in Vedic astrology is Rahu, the head of the dragon. And so, what that might mean is that something new is on the scene, something new that we might have to worry about. And I do want to look at the Saturn-Rahu conjunction, which really is now upon us, and just consider really what it might mean for the world at large. I mean, there are other things going on. I noticed that Marine Le Pen has just been given a 4-year prison sentence. I was going to talk about her today, but I think I'll talk about Marine Le Pen tomorrow, unless something else comes up. But so that's what I'm going to do. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough. Let's look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, April the 1st, 2025. As always, if you happen to like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indeed like it. And if you're not subscribed, I would be happy to have you as a subscriber. So let's see what's happening. So we definitely have the moon in Taurus. You can see that the moon is 27 Taurus. At least it's 27 Taurus at noon New York time on April the 1st. And it's making a conjunction to Uranus. So moon conjunct Uranus might be quite a fun aspect. Not particularly stable aspect, though. Things can happen with moon conjunct Uranus, and we mustn't assume that everything is going to work to plan. And so, it's always good to have a standby, a plan B, and we certainly shouldn't make assumptions about other people, for example, keeping their promises. And we ourselves can be a little bit unpredictable. We might behave in a way which we ourselves hadn't actually expected with moon conjunct Uranus. And additionally, the moon is making sextile aspects to Saturn and Mars. And there you can see you've got Saturn at 24 Pisces, Mars at 23 Cancer. So moon sextile Saturn, moon sextile Mars. If you look at each of those sextiles individually, one might be quite enthusiastic about it. Moon sextile Saturn, stability, controlling our feelings. Saturn in Pisces, moon in Taurus, certainly having strong feelings, but making sure that they don't get out of hand. Yet we've also got Moon sextile Mars. And in fact, Mars is making a trine to Saturn. And we might see that as having strong feelings and being able to focus them perhaps with laser beam precision. Though there is another way of looking at it, because Uranus is starting to move onto the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Mars trine Saturn with Uranus right on that midpoint. I think that midpoint configuration is exact on Friday, and it's not necessarily especially fortunate. It could be dramatic, it could be violent, and the moon may pick up on this. And there may be times today when there is an outbreak of violence, or we get some news which indicates or reminds us that the world is not especially stable. And then as the moon starts to move towards very late Taurus, it makes sextiles but with Mercury and Venus. And Moon sextile Mercury, Moon sextile Venus, these are pleasant aspects which make us feel comfortable. Sort of more comfortable than when the moon was on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, when the moon was conjunct Uranus. And we may be able to discuss our experiences and also just in general relate to other people in a relatively harmonious way. And then the moon moves into Gemini. So the moon moves into Gemini London time, I think at 2026. No, that's Greenwich Mean Time. I forget that the moon the clocks have gone forward in London. So moon moves into Gemini at 21:26. So that's 9:26 in the evening in London, which will be 10:26 in the evening, say in Paris or Berlin. So late this evening, there is a change. But if you're in Europe or Africa, you might have gone to bed by the time that happens. But if you are in the Americas, then this afternoon, the moon moves out of Taurus into Gemini, and there's more action, and you may get bored and feel you want to do something different, which would be great. And the moon, once it moves into Gemini, it makes a sextile to Neptune, and it also makes a trine to Pluto, and that sort of helps us think about what might be possible and to think about the kind of transformations which we want to bring about. And of course we are reminded, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, that it is the spring and the seasons are changing, and perhaps we're changing, and it's the beginning of a week, and so now might be a time to turn over a new leaf. So that's a picture for New York. If we look at the positions of the planets and we set them for Sydney, Australia, then the moon is earlier in the sign. The moon is at 18 degrees Taurus at the beginning at noon, around noon. Well, certainly noon in Sydney, and that does mean that probably the main aspect to consider is the moon applying to that sextile of Saturn and that sextile to Mars. You can get a lot of useful work done, but just bear in mind that as the moon moves through late Taurus, it is moving towards the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there could be moments of frustration and things just not working out, which is kind of surprising, because you'd think that moon sextile Mars, moon sextile Saturn would help get things moving, but that's not necessarily the case. Turning to the heliocentric view, here are the planets from the sun's viewpoint, and I'm not sure if there's a great deal to report. Mercury is in early Scorpio, 1 degree Scorpio, making a square to Pluto. So that's probably the main aspect of the day, Mercury square Pluto. And with Mercury square Pluto, some of us may feel that we have to keep our feelings and our thoughts to ourselves because we never know how people are going to respond. And if we're too quick to express our feelings or our opinions, we might get ourselves into trouble. On the other hand, there is a positive side to Mercury square Pluto, and that might be about being persuasive. It'll be hard work, but if we really want to get someone to believe in us, then maybe we can do it through the right choice of words. Another aspect that we've got is Mars quincunx Neptune. So Mars quincunx Neptune, Mars is how we express ourselves, how we assert ourselves. And Mars quincunx Neptune, it may just be that we go in the wrong direction. It may not be us. This is a heliocentric chart. It's about how people in control behave and people making decisions, politicians making decisions, and they may make the wrong decisions, or they may feel that they have to assert themselves, but they do it in such a way that isn't really helpful. It probably causes a lot of damage. And that's the broad picture for today, astrologically. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, April the 1st, 2025. Aries. Aries, as I said yesterday, you're still getting used to Neptune moving into your sign, and I do believe this is fortunate, and it is fortunate because you're at one with the cosmos, because it just so reflects who you are. You are an Aries. You like to take the initiative. You like to take action, and this is a kind of behavior that is going to be appreciated. But on a sort of more short-term level, we do have the moon moving through Taurus, and with the moon moving through Taurus, Aries, that's not necessarily the time for taking grand-scale initiatives. You may know what you want to do, but right now it's a time to be getting yourself together. There's nothing that you absolutely have to do, and you can take your time. And the moon, when it's moving through Taurus, it does make a sextile to Mars, and that sextile to Mars allows you to just concentrate on making sure that whatever you're planning, you're doing it from a viewpoint of security, but your springboard is firm, and you're not going to sort of mess up just at the last moment. It's like when you watch those YouTube videos of people jumping off mountains. Wingsuit, what do they call it? Base wingsuit people. I mean, they're very impressive videos. These people have these costumes, and they have these wings, and they can float for miles. But the worst bit, at least from a point of view of someone watching the video, is when they have to jump off a rock, and their footing seems to be really insecure, and I would have thought that the base on which you jump has to be secure. If you lose your footing as you plunge into the abyss, well, that's going to make matters even worse. So as you contemplate making your move, plunging ahead, you have to make sure that your footing is absolutely correct. You don't want to slip as you're about to plunge into the abyss. I'm not recommending, by the way, that you jump off cliffs. I think the problem about those people, those who make the YouTube videos, and when you look at the comments, you often see a comment saying, oh, well, this person died. The video was maybe quite a few years old, and then you realize that this person you're watching has been dead for a couple of years. And it's kind of like playing Russian roulette, isn't it? You keep doing something, and your chances of survival for each incident are okay. But if you are really addicted to jumping off mountains, then in the end something is going to go wrong. And I just hope you're not the kind of person that jumps off mountains. And now is certainly not the time to be jumping off mountains. You just have to make sure that the foundations of whatever you're planning are secure. And I do believe they can be, with the moon not just making a sextile to Mars, but also making a sextile to Saturn. And it may be Aries that today you just want to do some quiet preparations and making sure that everything is in order. And don't forget about money. Moon in Taurus, it's an earth sign. And if you want to take action to sort out some financial detail, now might actually be a good time to do it. Now, later in the day, if you're in Europe and the Americas, the moon does change sign. It does move into Gemini, and with the moon moving into Gemini, there could be a change of emphasis. I think that you're going to be more positive, more ready to take the plunge. I don't mean take the plunge literally, but you will have kind of done the preparations, hopefully, and you'll be looking for variety, and I think you can find that variety. Okay, that might be late this evening if you're in Europe, or this afternoon if you're in the Americas, but that sign change will happen, and hopefully you'll be ready for that change of sign. Taurus, moon is still in your sign, moving through Taurus, and it makes a conjunction to Uranus. And this conjunction between the moon and Uranus might be quite exciting. It allows you to think about yourself as an individual and how you want to rebel, maybe, because you are different. You're not someone who just follows the crowd, and this is especially the case while Uranus is moving through your sign. And Uranus does actually move into Gemini later in the year, but right now it's in Taurus. And so if you want to do something differently, or maybe indicate that you have a different view, then now might actually be the time to make it clear. You might cause a little bit of upset, but this probably can't be helped, and I think that you should be able to manage it, especially as the moon is making a lot of really nice sextiles. I mean, it does make a sextile to Mars and sextile to Saturn. I think that those two sextiles allow you to get yourself together and to provide yourself with some structure, so that you're prepared, and you work hard, and you just make sure that everything is in order. And then the moon makes sextiles to Venus and Mercury, so that sextile between Venus and Mercury does actually make you into quite an exciting person. You have an idea, you're action orientated, and I think in many cases people are going to be ready to listen to you, and you may actually find that you are at the center of things, and how things work out may to a greater extent depend on you and how you respond. So Taurus, that does mean that you might have a certain amount of responsibility. And, if people are going to listen to you, that might mean that you are something of a leader. People will follow your lead. And that means that you've got to be prepared to see something through. So if you start something, Taurus, then you've got to see it through to the end. And don't assume that other people can just finish it off. That's not necessarily the case. You have to be there at the beginning and also be there at the end. And as far as relationships are concerned, the moon is making sextiles to both Venus and Mars. And Venus is your ruler, Mars is ruler of Scorpio, your opposite sign. And so with moon bringing together Venus and Mars, that does suggest that you're going to be able to attract people's interest, and people are going to want to get closer to you. Especially if you come over as someone who is decisive, interesting, and maybe a little bit rebellious, because right now that's the kind of person that people need. And if you're already in a relationship, then you don't have to be too cautious. You can come up with ideas, and maybe that's what existing relationships need. They need a little bit of spark, and they need someone like you to come in and make a suggestion, and your suggestion, I think, in the end will be quite well received. Gemini, the moon does move into Gemini, your sign, at some stage. Now, that might be this afternoon if you're in the Americas. It could be this evening if you're in Europe or Africa, or it could be tomorrow if you're in Australasia. But the moon moving into Gemini, that is a good thing, because when the moon moves into Gemini, it will be starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter, and this will be a time when you can be positive, and you can start to fulfill your destiny, at least your short-term destiny. Jupiter is still in Gemini, and Jupiter stays in Gemini until June, and so it's important that you're ready to make things happen, and you're ready to take advantage of all the opportunities that Jupiter and Gemini should be providing right now. And I'm looking for those opportunities too, because I've got my sun in Gemini. But for most of the day, the moon is actually in Taurus, and with the moon in Taurus, you might feel that there are still things that you don't want to reveal, and if you feel that if you were to talk about them, you wouldn't necessarily get a favorable reception. But the moon does make a conjunction to Uranus in Taurus, so that indicates that you really want to create some change. You're not entirely happy with the way things are going, and it would be just good if you could stir things up a little bit and get a reaction. And maybe you can get a reaction, but you have to do it in a rather indirect way. You change something. No one notices what you change, and you just walk away. But the change has happened, and sooner or later that change will happen, and you will you'll have to deal with the consequences. And also, the moon is making sextile aspects to Venus and Mercury. That aspect, particularly the aspect between the moon and Mercury, is useful, and it allows you to do things. I think it remains the case that it's important to do things behind the scenes. I think if you try to be completely direct, then it's not going to work. And that's especially the case if you're working, if you're trying to impress people. Do it directly and it might backfire. But just work in ways that people don't at first see, and you will, in the end, be recognized and rewarded. Just remember, the moon has not gone into Gemini yet. Okay, that does happen sort of later in the day, but just have a sense of timing and realize that in the end you will get your opportunity. And don't forget that with that moon making a sextile to Mercury, it's also making a sextile to Venus. And Venus is a planet of relationships, so with moon making that aspect, you may start to realize that you and someone else have got a lot to offer each other. You've got a lot in common, and a relationship which maybe you thought wasn't going anywhere has new possibilities, and you can see how it can help you, and you further benefit from the fact that Mercury, having gone into Pisces, is in mutual reception to Jupiter, and that mutual reception between Mercury and Jupiter is a very relationship orientated configuration. And so I'm quite confident that if you handle people correctly, then they're going to respond very well to you. Cancer, the moon continues moving through Taurus, and that means that the moon continues to move through the sign of its exaltation. Okay, you could say that the moon is conjunct Algol. So Algol, obviously, this rather malefic fixed star, and with the moon conjunct Algol, there may be moments in the day when certain things freak you out a bit, when they bother you, and you might be concerned about other people's reaction to you, and at the same time you may be aware that some people are a little bit jealous of you. Algol, has many meanings, and jealousy is one possibility. That people who have Algol strongly configured in their chart can get people's attention, but it can be jealous attention. And so if you're doing something well in a public setting, don't think that everyone is cheering you on. Some people might want you to fail, because they're jealous of you, and that's how moon conjunct Algol can work, especially also as the moon is conjunct Uranus as well. So that moon-Uranus conjunction can be a surprise, and you can be surprised by other people's reaction to you. And how does that surprise come about? Well, you could just use your feelings and try to work out what is going on in someone's head and someone's heart, and then the penny drops and you realize what the truth is, and that could be a little bit of a shock. But I don't want to dwell on moon conjunct Algol, moon conjunct Uranus too much. The moon does make a sextile between Mercury and Venus. Sorry, you've got moon sextile Mercury, moon sextile Venus, and that does allow you to really present yourself very effectively. You can tell the world who you are and what you can do. Some people are going to be jealous, but not everyone, and you actually have the ability to work out who is jealous of you and who should be avoided. So you really can show the world, who you are and what you can do, and it may feel that you have an opportunity where you are in the limelight, and that this opportunity is not going to last forever. If you leave it for too long, too late in the day, you could miss your chance. Yeah, especially if you're in the Americas. Ideally, if you're in the Americas, then try to get as much as possible done at the beginning of the day or sort of by the early afternoon, because if you leave it too long, the moon will move into Gemini, and it's quite possible that you will have missed your chance. So you do consider your time zone. If you're in Europe, or there's not really that much of a hurry, because the moon doesn't move into Gemini until this evening, and if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon doesn't move into Gemini until tomorrow. So American Geminis, you haven't got all the time in the world. Oh, and one thing I should point out, which I haven't pointed out, is that Neptune is now moving through Aries. So Neptune did move into Aries over the weekend. And for you, Cancer, that is important, because Aries is a cardinal sign, and of course Cancer is a cardinal sign as well. And Neptune does move through Aries for quite a long time. Okay, it does go briefly back into Pisces at the end of the year, but overall Neptune does stay in Aries until the late 2030s, and this Neptune in Aries is asking you to have a look at where you're going and how you perceive your future. And things might not be quite as clear as you thought they were. And if you had got a fixed direction for yourself sorted out, while Neptune was in late Pisces, Neptune in Aries could, at least at first sight, start to undermine it. And it's going to be important that you're as open-minded as possible, and also that you consider what is changing in the world around you. And that's especially the case if you have a job or if you have a business, because with Neptune in Aries, the way you run your business, the way you work, is inevitably going to be changed by what's happening in society. I mean, this is happening for everyone, but I think it is especially important for Cancerians, and it really should not be a negative, because Cancer is a sensitive sign, and Cancer knows what's going on and tries its hardest to fit in with changing circumstances. Some people are very good at it. Some very, very rich people are good at it. Look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a Cancerian. I would not have said that Elon Musk is an innovator. He gives the impression of being an innovator, but I think that the appearance of innovation that Elon Musk has is actually his ability to understand what's happening around him. And if you actually look at some of the things he gets excited about, he's not the first person to get excited about. He waits for something to develop in society. For example, it might be cryptocurrency, or maybe it was electric cars. He waits for the excitement to start, and then he jumps on the bandwagon. And he jumps on the bandwagon at quite an early stage, but he is still jumping on a bandwagon. And there's nothing wrong with jumping on a bandwagon. Successful people are often successful, like Elon Musk, not necessarily because they're innovators, because they're very good at recognizing changing trends. And so whatever you think of Elon Musk, maybe you can take a leaf out of his book. Recognize a change, recognize that change early, and make the most of it. Leo, the moon continues moving through Taurus. Taurus is a sign which in your chart is very much connected with work, career, ambition, and it is a time when you want to make an impression. Even if you're not working, you still have a set of ambitions. There are still things you want to achieve, and with the moon moving through Taurus, making the conjunction to Uranus, you want to make things happen, and I think that you can make things happen. And with the moon making a conjunction to Uranus, it may be that you have to make a special effort to get noticed. Just a gesture or a word can make all the difference, so that people listen to you, people hear you, and people respond to you. And then the action starts. And the moon, having made a conjunction to Uranus, it makes a sextile to Mercury, and it makes a sextile to Venus. And that sextile is saying a lot about your ability to understand other people and to understand other people's weaknesses. And so you can, if you want, you can be ever so slightly manipulative. Through your understanding, you'll know what to say, what to do, and by getting a reaction, you're putting yourself in a strong position. So the key to success, especially in a social sense, is being able to understand what makes people tick, and understanding how to get a reaction out of them. Now, I should also point out that the moon is on Algol for some of the day. And, with the moon conjunct Algol, if you are working, then not everything is going to go smoothly. And you may come across things which are difficult, unpleasant, and there may be a jealousy in the working and business environment, because Algol is a fixed star that can be connected with jealousy. People who are probably victims of jealousy. I don't think it's about you being jealous of other people. It's more about people being jealous of you. Now, you might not think that anyone would be jealous of you. Why? I mean, what would be the point? But if you think about it carefully, then you might realize that someone's behavior at work, it's not about other environments, I don't think. But at work, if you are working, that someone's behavior is a bit off. And jealousy might be a reason for it. But don't worry about it, because, as I said, the moon is making a sextile to Mercury and Venus. So whatever the problems are, you actually have the ability to sort of smooth things over and make sure that however people feel, however negative they feel, they're not going to disrupt you too badly. And whatever you want to achieve today, you can get it done. And ideally, you should get going on it as soon as possible. And that's especially the case if you're in the Americas, because this afternoon the moon moves out of Taurus and into Gemini, and if you leave it too long, you might have missed your moment. So if there was something you're really planning on doing and you're an American Leo, then ideally, get it out of the way, by the early afternoon. Virgo, the moon continues its movement through Taurus, though it does move into Gemini this afternoon if you're in the Americas. And when you've got this sign change between Taurus and Gemini, it can be a transition from theory into practice. That can be how it's experienced. So, with the moon in Taurus, you might be thinking about what is possible, and you might have lots of ideas, and you're getting a chance to see things in a completely new way. And then the moon moves into Gemini, and the time for thinking things through, the time for speculating is over. Now that might sound strange because Gemini is a sign that you normally associate with thinking things through, coming up with different ideas. But in your case, because you're a Virgo, it is a bit different. The challenge will be to actually make things happen, and you're going to have to cut down on the possible courses of action. So you might start the day thinking that there are about 20 different things you can do, and by the end of the day you may realize that there are only 2 things to do. I'm not going to say one thing to do because the moon is in Gemini, and Gemini is a double-bodied sign, the twins, and so by the end of the day you should have distilled everything to 2 courses of action. They might complement each other, or you might feel that you want to hedge your bets a little bit. You can't completely hedge your bets, but you're trying 2 different possibilities. You know that one of them's going to work, and over the next couple of days it'll be quite clear which one is the one to go with. It might also apply to other people. So if you're making choices about people, then don't restrict yourself to just one person. You need 2 people. You always need to think about the standby. Who's going to be the replacement if someone drops out, or if someone can't honor their promises? It does happen. So don't put yourself in a position, Virgo, where you are completely reliant on another person. Now, one aspect that we do have is we got the moon, or 2 aspects, is we got the moon making sextiles to Mercury and Venus, and those 2 sextiles, which happen just before the moon moves into Gemini, could actually be really quite good for relationships and for making the most of other people and just seeing what people can do. Give people a chance, and don't rush to judgment, because what seems to be an unreasonable attitude or an unreasonable plan could actually work out very well. But you've got to let other people explain, and you must also be aware that however much of an expert you are, there are certain key areas at the moment where other people know more about something from you, and just maybe a very specific issue. It's not that they know more about everything from you, but they just have one little piece of expertise that you can benefit from. So give people a chance. That could be quite important today. Libra, the moon is making a sextile to Venus. It's also making a sextile to Mars, and with this aspect involving both Venus and Mars, you can, I believe, benefit from other people. Don't exclude relationships. To consider how other people can be useful, but it does have to be on your terms. At the moment, you have an idea about the way things should be working out, and it's quite a fixed idea, and it's okay for it to be a fixed idea. Sometimes it's not necessary to be completely open-minded. You have a view, and you have to ask yourself how other people are going to conform with this view. And I do think that you're going to find people who are supportive, and part of your advantage is emotional. While it's true that Libra, all things being equal, is not the most emotional of the 12 signs, I think at the moment there is a certain emotional depth to you, and you have an intensity which is quite appealing and is also useful, and other people pick up on it. And additionally, through the intensity of your feelings, you can have an understanding of other people, and also you can understand, which people are worth bothering with. And that sounds a bit harsh, but sometimes you do have to make choices. Additionally, Venus is still making a conjunction to a North Node. We had that Venus conjunct North Node yesterday. I talked about it, and it's still there. And with Venus conjunct the North Node, it's not a time to be alone. The North Node is not just about karma or what you should be doing from a destiny perspective. It is about other people. It's a point of contact. And today you can make numerous points of contact. You can tell the world you exist, and you can do it in quite a systematic way. And you're not making a lot of noise about it. You don't have to make a special effort to advertise yourself. People just are available, and they come your way, and you can make some really good connections. And ideally, it will be for a purpose. Everything is for a reason, and there are things you can't do on your own where you do need help. And I think that Venus conjunct the North Node is going to facilitate that. So don't disregard other people, and really consider how they can help you actually organize your life. You try your hardest to organize things, to make sure things are in the right place, but you're not always successful. Things are still, in certain areas, a bit of a mess. And with Venus conjunct the North Node, the right person can just sort things out for you. That does require some honesty on your part, being able to explain a problem that you're having to another person, but they will get it. And it just may be worthwhile getting that assistance now, and it could just save you a lot of effort. And that assistance could be close at hand. Someone you know very well, you just tell them you've got a problem, tell them that you're not quite sure how to deal with something, and the response will be very immediate. And so it's not about you battling the world on your own. And additionally, we've got the moon making sextile to Venus and making a sextile to Mars. And so Mars is ruler of Aries. Aries is your opposite sign. So that does bring people together. It brings you together with other people. And additionally, you're able to make the right choices. You're not going to be fooled. So you will know who can be helpful, and you'll know who is going to be less than helpful. Scorpio. Scorpio, the moon continues to move through Taurus. It does make a conjunction to Uranus. And this conjunction to Uranus might have a surprising quality. So don't make assumptions about the way things are going to work out. And it's not just because the moon is making a conjunction to Uranus. It's also the fact that the moon is on Algol, and when Algol is involved, all sorts of things can happen, and you can't necessarily make assumptions about other people's good nature. Certain people are not necessarily trustworthy. Additionally, moon conjunct Algol may suggest that there are certain people around you who are somewhat traumatized, and that trauma may be reflected in their words and their actions. And we can also maybe see this from the fact that the Mars is actually still square Chiron. I mean, it's not exact. Last week that Mars Chiron was exact, and it's still there. And with Mars square Chiron, that might be about you having to deal with people who are at some level traumatized, and that's supported by the fact that the moon is conjunct Algol. So when you look at how people behave, always ask yourself why. And as a Scorpio, you're able to really get under the surface and to understand what is going on, and to, in the end, show some real sympathy. So that's certainly something you can do. And the moon, while it's moving through late Taurus, makes sextiles to Venus and Mars. So Venus and Mars are the two relationship planets, and so that indicates, Scorpio, that from a relationship perspective, it can actually be a very good day. Of course, that does depend on what the opportunities are and what you want and what you're looking for. But if you feel you're alone, or you need support, or you're trying to get closer to someone, then now really might be your chance, and it might happen through a surprise. Moon conjunct Uranus. Something happens, and as a result of this thing happening, people get almost attracted to the event. And as people get attracted to the event, then relationships can form. So there is an unexpected quality. Now, that unexpected quality has a positive and negative side. Moon conjunct Uranus could be about being upset by another person's behavior, but it also could be about, you and another person being attracted to the same thing, perhaps attracted to the same event, and then perhaps realizing that you've actually got quite a lot of things in common. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, for much of the day, you're trying to get things together. You know that nothing is perfect, and if you can organize things, then you'll be preparing yourself for the future. Now, organization as a word has connotations of boringness. It doesn't sound much fun if you're trying to organize things, but you have the capacity at the moment, Sagittarius, to organize things in a rather unusual way. You can have ideas about where things should be placed, or how routines should be structured, and it's interesting. And to an outsider, it might actually be a little bit disturbing. But you have your own way of running things, and it's very important that you follow this. It's not about following other people's schedules, other people's preconceptions. It's all about you and what kind of structure you're looking for. And with Moon conjunct Uranus, you can stir things up, and that's perhaps what you need, and also maybe it's what other people need, because the last thing anyone wants is just to carry on as they have done before. Because if you've been doing something for months and years in the same old way, it might have worked in the past, but will it work in the future? Not necessarily. And so contemplating change now might actually be quite a good thing, and it might be very healthy. And at some stage today, maybe tomorrow, the moon does move out of Taurus and it moves into Gemini. And moon moving into Gemini, for you, that does indicate that other people are going to matter more. I think there's going to be less focus on organization and getting things together and structure and routines and plans. So when the moon moves into Gemini, that does change. And this sign change is especially important if you're in the Americas, because it takes place this afternoon. And if you're in other parts of the world, it happens pretty late in the day, so it may not be especially relevant. But if you're an American Sagittarius, then in the last part of the day, try to consider what other people are doing. Pay more attention also to other people's likes and dislikes. At the beginning of the day, you don't have to worry about it, but at the end of the day, it might be important. And if you don't take into account other people's views, then you might spend a lot of time working on something and it just doesn't really work out. So do consider other people. And the moon, when it moves into Gemini, it makes a sextile to Neptune, and that moon sextile Neptune might give you an idea about another person, sort of emotional idea, something rather intangible, but you get a feeling about someone, and it's an insight, and it might sound a bit crazy, but you probably got it about right. And so if you feel something about someone and it logically sounds rather extraordinary, it still is possible that you've actually evaluated the situation correctly and your judgment of another person is spot on. Capricorn, you are quite active at the moment. There are just things happening, and you are, to an extent, at the center of things, and you're able to make connections, and you're also able to give people advice, and people are going to like having you around. And that's because we've got the moon in Taurus. It's making a sextile to Saturn. It's making a sextile to Mars, and it's bringing together the moon. The fact that it's bringing together a Mars-Saturn trine, and so you're able to make things happen really very easily, though this might not have occurred to you. You might not have realized that things are going your way. It sort of almost happened by stealth. But if you do anything today, whatever it is, it's likely to have a result. And so Capricorn, decide, what do you want? What would you like to happen? And you can make it happen. And don't delay, especially if you're an American Capricorn. You're going to be at your strongest this morning and perhaps early this afternoon. If you leave it too late, then you might have lost some of your cutting edge, not all of it. So try to be influential, and try to talk to people, try to persuade people, have ideas, even if other people don't matter. Even if other people are not around, you can still have an impact. Even if you're completely alone, you can work hard on something. You can make things happen, and you don't actually have to work very hard on it, because there's a natural facility. Things naturally move, and that means you don't have to exaggerate. In fact, it would be a bad idea if you were to exaggerate or to get obsessed about anything. You can certainly get results, but if you are desperate to make something happen and you are too focused, then you might cause people to get upset. I mean, they'll still respect you, but you have the capacity to cause a lot of damage, and that would be unnecessary. And it just may be about intensity. You can work on a low intensity level and get all the results you need. And if you turn that intensity up too much, then you're going to be counterproductive. So understand your role and also understand the impact you have, and do show some sympathy to other people, because you can affect them. You can affect them in a way that is very fortunate and can really help them out, but just provided you don't just come over too strongly, or that you might be a little bit judgmental, and avoid being judgmental. It's unnecessary to be judgmental. People know where they've got it wrong, by and large. You don't have to tell them, and that might be a trap. You might feel you have to go all the way. It's not enough to correct someone. You have to go over everything they've done wrong, and that would be counterproductive. But it also applies to yourself. Capricorns can be very self-critical, and this would be especially the case if you're not having a particularly sociable Tuesday, and if you're on your own, trying to work things out on your own, you might be aware of mistakes you've made in the past, but these mistakes, they're not serious mistakes, certainly not as serious as you think they are, and it's not about worrying about the past. It's about correcting these mistakes and moving on and just creating something really very positive, which is an essential expression of who you are. Aquarius, you can't assume today that everything is going to run smoothly, because there is a conjunction between the moon and Uranus, and the moon-Uranus conjunction may just create some events that you weren't expecting, and you have to perhaps give them more time than you'd realized. These events could take many forms, but they're likely to be concentrated on your home and your domestic setting. It might be that they're very sort of mundane and physical. Something needs to be fixed or repaired, or it could be a member of your family needs more attention than you'd expected. But there can also be an emotional side to things, or it might be about you thinking about something and it has more of an impression on you than you'd realized. And Aquarians, are supposed to be quite forward thinking, but at the moment, Aquarius, you may be thinking quite a lot about the past, and what was happening in the past. Right at the beginning of this video, I talked about T.S. Eliot's poem The Wasteland, and how April can be connected with memories, and you're thinking back to the past and what you were able to do in the past, and how in the present there aren't quite so many opportunities, or at least that might be how it feels, and there could be a certain sadness there, a certain wistfulness, and that can take up time. Sometimes you just have to go through your feelings, and so that might be how this moon conjunct Uranus works. But ideally, you won't be entirely alone, and you'll consider other things going on around you, not just in terms of your home and your family. I mean, the moon is making a sextile to Venus, it's making a sextile to Mars, it's also making a sextile to Saturn. And so try to be as involved as possible with whatever's going on, because if you're involved with things, with what's going on in other people's lives, what's happening in the world, then you're not going to be so focused on yourself and your own needs. It's good to be focused on yourself, but there's some danger that you take it too far. Now, the moon does change sign, It will change sign this afternoon if you're in the Americas, this evening if you're in Europe, tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And, with that sign change, moon moving from Taurus into Gemini, things are probably going to become easier. They're going to be less intense, and you'll feel that you have more freedom to be yourself, and also you're less likely to be negative and to be introspective, and you can start to think about possibilities, your possibilities, the possibilities of you being able to do something special, but that's also fun. And the moon, when it moves into Gemini, it starts making a conjunction to Jupiter. Okay, that Moon-Jupiter conjunction will be more of a feature of tomorrow, but it's still starting, that Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini, one of your fellow air signs. And so as the day progresses, as you move into tomorrow, things should be less intense, and you can start to think about possibilities and not worry so much about the past. Pisces, you've got a lot to contribute, a lot to say, and in fact, Pisces, there are a few subjects that you're not able to discuss. You actually might realize that your knowledge is quite considerable. Sometimes, Pisces, you doubt your knowledge. You think that you don't know enough, but you pick up all sorts of things. That's the way that Pisces works. It's not just about studying books. Information comes your way at all sorts of levels. Of course, Einstein was a Pisces. I think he had a lot of planets in fire signs, but he was a Pisces. And so, one wonders how Pisces gets to know so much stuff and is able to bring that stuff together and to make connections. And this is something that you can do, and you can do it today. And there'll be maybe moments today when things make sense, and it could just be one moment you're completely confused, and the next moment it's obvious, and it could just strike you just like that, and it just makes things so much easier. And part of the way in which you can bring things out into the open is actually through thinking them through, or maybe talking them through. You talk about something you don't understand to people who are willing to listen, and at first you might not feel that you know what you're talking about, but then things start making sense, and you realize that you're speaking with a certain amount of authority. And to get that kind of revelation, you don't have to go anywhere. It might actually be a good idea not to go anywhere. Moon conjunct Uranus in Taurus, you might think that taking a journey, just a journey of a few miles, might be harmless. It's not going to cause any problems, but it just could be more trouble than it's worth. So ideally, Pisces, you should avoid unnecessary traveling, especially if you're doing it by car or maybe by bus, or where you're reliant on external circumstances. Even driving a car, you're reliant on traffic conditions. You're also relying on the behavior of other motorists, or if you're going by bus, buses can be late. Mercury is still retrograde, don't forget. Transport plans can be delayed or frustrated. So, don't feel you have to go anywhere to be inspired. And in fact, if you just stay where you are, that's where you can gain the most in terms of knowledge and inspiration. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I now want to look at today from the viewpoint of the Ching. So I ask the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was a hexagram number 9, which is the taming power of the small. And with the taming power of the small, you don't want to take on too much today. That would be a bad idea. You can't expect things to happen. And the I Ching likes to say, dense clouds, no rain. And it is one of those dense clouds, no rain kind of day. Okay, it might be pouring with rain where you are. It's certainly been raining a lot where I am in Washington State. But rain represents action. And those dense clouds represent potential, but actually nothing is going on, or not much is going on. So it's very important that you are able to exercise some control over yourself. And, the taming power of the small, it may be right now we are the small. We can't actually do very much. And we're just not up to the challenges around us. This is a temporary situation. This is just a hexagram for today with the taming power of the small. But we don't want to rush ahead, but we might rush ahead. The problem here is that the third line moves, and the third line moving has a symbol of a carriage with something going wrong with a wheel. It might be a broken spoke, or it might just this whole carriage might come to grief in mud, and people getting spattered with mud. That can happen. And the reason this happens is because we plow ahead. We feel we want to do something anyway, and because of this, we get ourselves into trouble. And in fact, we might embarrass ourselves, and certain relationships could be disturbed, because the I Ching does talk about a man and his wife, husband and wife. And the Legge translation, the James Legge translation of the I Ching for this line, it says, husband and wife looking on each other with averted eyes. The Wilhelm translation talks about husband and wife rolling their eyes. So it's an embarrassing situation. Someone's made a mistake. Someone's ploughed on into something they don't really understand. What can be said? Someone's embarrassed. Someone is averting their eyes. Why did you go and do that? What can we say? You don't want to say anything. So if in doubt, don't. And this hexagram, third line moving, we do move to a different hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is 61, inner truth. I don't think actually you can see the letters particularly well on there, because I've had to do this recording in a different location. And with inner truth, you can't really see it well, but it is 61, inner truth. And so after all the drama of the previous hexagram, we get it. We understand. And we might have started off having quite a high opinion of ourselves, the ego. But now the inner truth, we've got two broken lines in the middle with that empty part center of that hexagram. That shows that there is purity there. We've lost our ego, and we actually realize what it was all about. And inner truth may be about being aware of our mistakes, and also being aware that someone else may know more about a matter than we do. And it could be about accepting that we need to get advice, or accepting someone else's wisdom, and not trying to plow on and think we have all the answers. So it's not a disastrous day. Though in terms of that previous hexagram and that third line, remember the moon is conjunct Uranus, and so that previous hexagram with that third line with the carriage wheel, then then that indicates moon conjunct Uranus. Now, when I was talking to Pisces, when I did the forecast for Pisces, I was suggesting that perhaps it might be a good idea to avoid driving. Maybe, given this hexagram, perhaps all of us should avoid driving, because there's a specific reference to a wheel going wrong. So, in a physical sense, wherever there's a wheel, there's a potential for a problem. I mean, it could be the wheel on a wheelbarrow. Just wheels might be trouble, but maybe I'm looking at this hexagram too literally. The point is that we just need to hold back, and in the end, even if something bad does happen, it won't be disastrous. But even if we do make a fool of ourselves, then in the end we will have some concept of what is the right course of action. Hence that final hexagram, the inner truth. And now I want to go back to the astrology, and I want to continue on the theme of yesterday. So if you watched my video for yesterday, I talked about sidereal astrology, the fact that in Vedic astrology they use a different zodiac, and it's 24 degrees behind the Western zodiac. And I mentioned that Saturn had just gone into sidereal Pisces, and here's a chart I showed. I showed that on last Saturday, the 29th at 12:15, Saturn went into Pisces. Now this is a sidereal chart. In reality, Saturn is in a tropical zodiac, Saturn is at 24 Pisces. Now, Saturn moving into Pisces has consequences, and one consequence it has relates to the North Node. Now, let me just go back to the chart for today. So, today, in the Western zodiac, you will see that Saturn is at 24 degrees Pisces and the North Node is at 27 Pisces. So, yes, it's true that Saturn is conjunct the North Node. But from a Vedic perspective, Saturn has only just made that conjunction to the North Node, because in Vedic astrology, a conjunction is not something sort of angular, at least in my basic knowledge of Vedic astrology. I mean, there are different kinds of Vedic astrology, and I'm sure there are approaches to Vedic astrology where the angles are important. But in terms of Vedic astrology, as I understand it, aspects are often sign to sign. They're not. You don't really focus on the precise angle. So what happened when Saturn went into sidereal Pisces last Saturday is that, because it had been in Aquarius, all of a sudden Saturn made a conjunction to the North Node. So the North Node in Vedic astrology is malefic. So is Saturn. It is malefic. And that's a generalization, and you've got to weigh things up. I must make it clear, if you are a Vedic astrologer, I am not making any claims to expertise here. There are people out there who know far more about Vedic astrology than me. I'm primarily a Western astrologer, but I wanted, using my limited knowledge, to just point out that Saturn and the North Node are making a conjunction to each other. I did have a comment a few weeks back by someone saying, well, what about Saturn conjunct the North Node? And thank you for that commenter, but now I'm addressing the issue. What does it mean? And in this video, I primarily want to consider it from the viewpoint of the world and what one might expect. Now, the North Node in Vedic astrology is the head of the dragon. I mean, in Western astrology as well. But more specifically, the North Node represents the demon that, the demon. The story goes, if I've got this right, is that there was a demon that stole the potion of immortality from the gods. The demon stole it and drank it. The gods cut the demon in half, but of course the demon was immortal, so cutting it in half because it just drunk this potion, and hence the tail of the dragon, or the head of the demon, and the tail of the demon, and Rahu and Ketu. So the North Node in Vedic astrology is Rahu, and the South Node is Ketu. And Rahu is conjunct Saturn. And so when Rahu is conjunct Saturn, we might expect difficult events. We might expect things to go wrong. We might expect society perhaps to break down. We might have to start afresh, perhaps because of some dramatic event, or it might be a series of dramatic events. And an example of Saturn conjunct North Node, a period of time that Saturn was conjunct the North Node was the end of the Second World War. So here is the Vedic. All the charts I'm going to show now are going to be Vedic. I'm going to be using the Lari Ayanamsha. I'm not using the tropical zodiac. So this is the chart for Hitler committing suicide. Again, it's a Vedic chart, and you will see that Saturn is conjunct the North Node in this chart. And so it's not just about Hitler's death, it's about all the stuff that was happening in 1945, the complete breakdown of one way of looking at the world and sort of the new order, you can say, sort of economically, that sort of was the ascendancy of the United States, and in terms of Europe, the new breakup of Europe. You had the sort of the East, the Soviet-dominated Europe, and then of course you had the Western American-dominated Europe. So things were split, and that split. I mean, if you think about Europe and the Iron Curtain and the European and the Western and the Soviet zones of influence, and you go back to the legend, the Indian legend of a demon being cut in half, being split, there may be an element of that. It may be a very divisive thing. Now, from a Vedic view, this Saturn North Node conjunction was in Gemini. So remember, this is sidereal Gemini. In actual fact, the Saturn and North Node were in the tropical zodiac, they were in Cancer. But in terms of the splitting of Europe, a Saturn conjunct the North Node in sidereal Gemini does seem to fit quite well, doesn't it? And there were other things going on in 1945. Hiroshima. So this is a chart of Hiroshima, and Saturn was still conjunct the North Node. So you will see that Saturn is conjunct North Node with a 10-degree orb. But remember, Saturn is conjunct the North Node from a Vedic viewpoint, when Saturn and the North Node are both in the same sign. And so the fact that the moon had joined them in Gemini, that really does sort of indicate the power of the event, the power of Hiroshima. That moon was almost saying what day one really experienced the full power of Saturn conjunct North Node. And that's the Second World War. And a bit later, in the 60s, we had a conjunction between the Saturn and the North Node. Beginning of 1968. And the beginning of 1968 was a tumultuous time at many different levels. So in Vietnam, you had the Phong Nai massacre on February 12, 1968. Now, the Phong Nai massacre was committed by South Korean troops. Remember, the South Koreans were in Vietnam, and some of the worst atrocities in Vietnam were not committed by Americans, but were committed by South Koreans. And there's a Sun North Node conjunction in Pisces, and so with that Saturn North Node conjunction, again, you're seeing the breakup of things. You're seeing the beginnings of civil unrest, and well, of course, in this case, it's people responding to people they don't understand. People walking into a village. I think in the South Korean case, I think a couple of South Koreans might have been killed in some event. I think there have been some explosive devices, and that might have explained why the South Korean soldiers were a little bit trigger happy. And another massacre in Vietnam that happened at a very proximal time to the Phong Nai massacre was the My Lai massacre. So the My Lai massacre happened the next month. Of course, in this case, the Americans were involved. Yeah. I think William Calley, I think he just died, William Calley, didn't he? He was in charge of the troops involved in the My Lai massacre. And again, we see Saturn conjunct the North Node. And so it was that kind of time in which people were living. There were also some assassinations when Saturn was conjunct the North Node. Martin Luther King was assassinated at the beginning in early 1968. So here it is. Here's Martin Luther King's assassination. Again, these are all sidereal times. So there we have, again, Saturn conjunct the North Node in Pisces. That certainly made the environment in the United States extra tense and very divisive. And a couple of months after that, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Again, here's Bobby Kennedy's assassination, June the 5th, 1968, with North Node, Saturn conjunct the North Node. So that was 1968, and it was that kind of year, or at least particularly the beginning of the year, when, from a Vedic perspective, Saturn and the North Node were making a conjunction. If you want to look at another assassination, by the way, which had a Saturn conjunct North Node, Vedic, is the assassination of Caligula. And Caligula was, him and his family were killed by the Praetorian Guard, and Saturn in Scorpio was conjunct the North. There was a Saturn North Node conjunction in Scorpio. And so we now have Saturn conjunct the North Node right now. And it may say something about what we're moving into. And so this happened. So going back to where we are, from a Vedic perspective, this happened. The conjunction started the moment Saturn moved into sidereal Pisces, and on March 29th, on Saturday. So at that stage, after that, Saturn and North Node, from a Vedic perspective, are in conjunction. And so we might want to look back to the 1940s. We might look back to the beginning of 1968. Or if you're into ancient history, you might want to consider what was going on at the time of the assassination of Caligula. Who is Caligula? I'm not going to make any suggestions. You can make you can decide which world leader best fits the model of Caligula. I'm not suggesting anyone's going to get killed, but I just thought I'd point out that Caligula was assassinated when Saturn was conjunct the North Node. And so we're in this time. It is a divisive period, and it is about breakdown. It's about things splitting up, and we do need to be aware of this, while this conjunction is in force. And in future videos, I will be discussing it in a more specific way, focusing on particular people, particular events. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.